All right. Well, we're going to keep this conversation going. I am so excited to have Emily Chang here with us to talk about her book, Brotopia, Breaking Up the Boys Club of Silicon Valley. And in the interest of time, I just want to drop a few stats in your lap, and we're going to talk about all of your juicy stories and lessons in this book. But our report says that 35% of bachelor's degrees in STEM are awarded to women, and in California, 21% of degrees are awarded to women in computer science. So that gives you, just a little idea of who's kind of funneling in. But there was also a really intense statistic that we covered in our report, which is to say that 60% of women across positions and ages in Silicon Valley in the last 10 years have experienced sexual harassment in the workplace. That's a staggering number, right? 60%. So that just sets the stage for you. But I really want to get the conversation started by asking, why did you write this book, and who did you write it for?
Well, I wrote it for everyone, men and women across industry. And I do think there are many things that you see in Silicon Valley that do span industries. And don't get me wrong, sexism and sexual harassment exist everywhere. But Silicon Valley does, I think, have a particular brand of it. I'm a journalist, and I've been covering Silicon Valley specifically for about 8 years now. I have a television show where I get to interview some of the most prominent people in tech, whether it's Tim Cook or Mark Zuckerberg or Sheryl Sandberg. And over time, this is something I've always cared about because, as you said, the numbers are horrible. I started becoming more courageous about asking questions. What are you doing to hire women and promote women and fund women? And by the way, another statistic that you may not know is that women-led companies get 2% of venture capital funding. So this is an industry that styles itself as a meritocracy. In no way is 2% meritocratic. No. I think we can all agree. And I realized that when I asked these questions on camera, you get sort of that PC response, and then off camera you get the real story. And I just realized this is an incredibly personal and emotional topic, but such an important one. And I felt like the only way to really explore it was in a book, which could have been thousands of pages, but it's only 300.
And it's a quick read. This year in particular, there's been a massive backlash to tech in just combating the bro culture. But there's also systemic issues that we need to deal with across industry. And I wonder, how is tech different than other industries that are heavily bro culture, like maybe Wall Street?
I can't tell you how many times people said to me, well, Silicon Valley can't possibly be worse than Wall Street. In fact, it is. So actually, and I was surprised to learn this, that if you look at the top banks across the board, they're about 50-50 when it comes to their gender ratio. They have a lot of work to do when it comes to women in leadership and promoting women. But in tech, as you say, we're looking at 25% women. We're looking at women accounting for 7% of investors. And I do think, we've all heard this idea of Silicon Valley changing the world. Sure. This is an industry that has never shied away from hard problems, whether it's connecting the world or organizing the world's information, changing how we shop, how we get around, how we communicate. And so there's this belief in Silicon Valley that everybody's just trying to make the world a better place. Right. But I think that belief, and combine that with the incredible amount of wealth and power that Silicon Valley has amassed in such a short period of time, has led to a sense of entitlement and, quite frankly, arrogance, and this sort of sense of moral exceptionalism that has, in my opinion, stood in the way of admitting that there is a problem. And that it is a hard problem, but it isn't for an industry that's never shied away from hard problems, like taking us to Mars. Right. We can do this too. Absolutely. We can change the world together.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. So in your mind, what companies or leaders are on the vanguard in terms of including diversity and inclusion into their workplaces?
So the book isn't entirely depressing. I mean, there are bright spots. There are people out there trying and doing incredible things. And there are a lot of lessons being learned. And actually, It's interesting, Judith was talking about her time at Google, which to me is a company that actually started out with good intentions. And Larry Page and Sergey Brin, the founders, actually hired some incredible women in the early days, like Sheryl Sandberg and Susan Wojcicki and Marissa Mayer, who helped build this incredible business. And when Google started off, its success was far from a sure thing. There were 14 different search engines competing for dominance. Right. But when we look back, we sort of think, they were the first to future. Of course, they were destined for greatness. When in fact, the real story is that they had this incredible team, with a at least in the early days, a diverse set of perspectives. But over time, I argue that Google lost focus and was just trying to fill the seats as fast as possible. And I mean, it was actually one of the hardest chapters of the book to write, because so many people in Silicon Valley have worked at Google at some point in their career, so there's so many inputs. But over time, they defaulted to industry standards of recruiting, and picked their heads back up at the end of the financial crisis. And one of the top HR reps said to me, we were just like, oh my God, where are all the women? Like, what happened? I mean, there's a few lessons there, which is this has to be a priority year after year after year. But also, this isn't just the right thing to do, which I believe it is. This is the smart thing to do. This is about having a better shopping app, or better facial recognition technology, which is some would argue already sexist and racist, because it doesn't recognize women and people of color.
Because they're being built by white men.
Exactly. And so there's so many, I talk of the last chapter is really focused on solutions. I talk about a company called Slack, where the CEO has, sort of made it his mission to build a diverse team. And by the way, the companies in Silicon Valley, the few of them that are run by women, like Stitch Fix and Eventbrite, where they have female CEOs, they're 50-50.
Right, of course.
So just having women in leadership attracts more women to your company.
Yeah, and when you prioritize gender equity initiatives, it's easy to do, one would say. Excellent. Well, you're very familiar with Silicon Valley, but we in California have Silicon Beach, right? So a lot of companies are moving here. Google has offices, BuzzFeed, YouTube, right down the road here. And we're beginning to see these companies moving in, having impact on our housing and employment. I wonder if there are lessons from the book that you could kind of provide us so we don't become another Silicon Valley, or if we're too late.
It's interesting because I've been asked about that, and we see generally the same statistics repeated everywhere in smaller communities, tech communities, whether it is Austin or Seattle. And I honestly think the same rules and advice would apply in Silicon Beach as it does in Silicon Valley. This is something where change really needs to come from the top. And I do think that CEOs and investors need to be pounding their fists on the table. We want this, change needs to happen, we care. And honestly, whether they're doing it because of public pressure or they really do believe in this, I almost don't care, because I believe that if you get women in the room, that's when you have a real culture change. If you have 6 men around a dinner table, the conversation is a certain way. You add one woman, it's a slightly different conversation. If it's half and half, it's a completely different conversation. And that is what we're talking about. And I agree there are roles that we all can play too, and I think we need to listen more, we need to ask more. We can't always expect women to be the ones speaking up for themselves, or the victim, whoever that is, speaking up. So when you see sexism, when you see someone getting mansplained or interrupted or not getting a chance where you think they should, call that out, whether it's in the moment or afterwards.
Absolutely. Well, those are some great tangibles that everyone can take with them into their own workplaces. Is there any other lessons you would like to talk about for the women in the room, if they're not in tech, and what they can do to kind of push gender equity forward in their own workplace?
Most importantly is know your value, because I think we all, as women, it's very easy to underestimate ourselves. I do it too. I feel like an imposter sometimes, and I try to repress those feelings. And so that's part of our nature. You could say that it's cultural, or that has been socialized. I'm sure we could have many social scientists debate. But I do think knowing your value and having confidence in yourself is the most important thing. especially right now. I mean, this is an industry that is desperate for talented women. So you have the power right now. And if you are looking for a place to work, don't just choose the hottest company on the block or the brand name. Make sure you find a place where you can find your team and find allies and where you feel like you can learn and grow. I walked into this thinking that, oh, startups must be worse than big companies because they're more immature when it comes to their culture. But in fact, what I learned, or at least what the many, I interviewed hundreds of people for this book, told me is that it really depends on your manager. So if you get a great manager, no matter where you are, you can have an amazing experience. But if you have a bad manager, you can have a horrible experience.
Sure.
And so, we don't always make the right decisions, right? But I do think ask those questions. In Silicon Valley, they use this term called culture fit, which is you're looking for people who fit your culture.
Right.
And I hate that term because I think it's an insidious way to just reject people who don't look like you or act like you.
Yep. Institutionalized. Yep.
And I prefer the term culture addition. So, when you're looking for people to join your company, it's sort of validating that you like your culture or you believe in your culture. And I do think it's important to write those values down early on, but that you want to expand it and bring in new perspectives.
Absolutely.
Because we all know, diverse teams have better results, are more creative, and by the way, make more money too.
Absolutely. Well, there are a lot of daunting statistics and stories in your book, but there are also a lot of hopeful moments. So I wonder if you will read the last paragraph of your book, because I think it really just sends us in the right direction to think about the optimism around women in tech. So
thank you. I would love to do that.
Yes, thank you so much.
So the last 6 pages, I interview 6 teenage girls who've all learned how to code from a variety of backgrounds, and they're so excited and so hopeful. But they read the news, and I mean, the book makes a broader argument about how the tech industry actually created the pipeline problem by having such a narrow idea of who can do this job. And not that there isn't a pipeline problem today, because there is, but the industry is also reinforcing the problem by not being, representing. We want to be the change, right? We can't be what we can't see, and the tech industry needs to be something that these girls can see. And so, they knew what was going on at Uber, for example, as some of you may have been following the dramatic and spectacular decline of the CEO, Travis Kalanick. They know that Sheryl Sandberg is one of very few women who have shattered, in a way, at least broken through the silicon ceiling.
Right.
And so it was, to me, direct evidence that the industry itself, has so much work to do just to keep encouraging these women to come through the door. So with that said, I will read the last paragraph here. It's hard not to be inspired and hopeful listening to these young women's dream. The girls are already knowledgeable about some of the headwinds that they will face when they open the door to Brotopia. I didn't feel comfortable telling them about the others. They'll find out soon enough. What they made clearer than ever was this: the next generation is coming. They expect to have rewarding careers in technology, and they dream of making a dent in the universe, just as the early founders did. When they open the door, let's welcome them and change the valley and the world for them and for all.
Amazing. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for reading that really important end to your book. I want to say thank you for being here and for sharing your wisdom with all of us. I do also want to say that we ran out of Emily's books earlier, but we have more now, and they're signed. So please, please make sure, don't miss out on this book, because it is invaluable in terms of the knowledge that we can learn about tech and also how we can change our own industries. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you guys so much for having me. Thank you.